one of the most challenging jobs I had a few years back was replacing and doing the job search to replace Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. And when he retired, we got a position, and the initial idea, of course, was, would Seligman come? Would Ed Diener come? Who out there, could come in and teach and energize our students? And so lots of applications, but the minute I met Professor Saida Heshmati, it was, I don't need to look at anything else. And Saida joined us as an assistant professor, and just this month received tenure here at Claremont Graduate University. She studies a lot of things. One thing you might not pull out of the talk today is she's a world-class methodologist. She teaches statistics of various high-level sorts and uses those to understand the topics that we all care about. She has a lab here on campus that looks at human flourishing across the lifespan, issues around love and well-being. And when we invited Sonia to join us last night, we were really I was really curious, what was the thing that after 36 years she's found that's, the key to our well-being. And the topic of feeling love, Saida has been studying with a huge grant for the last 2 or 3 years. She's now, known and published around this notion of, what makes us feel love. But when Sonia was asked the question, is it cultural? That's what Saida's work is all about. She's now traveling all around the world studying what makes people feel loved cross-culturally in a lot of different settings. So we're really honored and really excited to hear a lot more about really what makes us feel loved across cultures. So let's welcome Saida Heshmati.
I'm hoping I don't need a microphone. Is that okay? Can you all hear me at the back? Okay, fantastic. All right, let's get this out of the way. Alrighty, well, thank you all, and thank you, Stuart, for that wonderful introduction. You are always too kind to me, and a fabulous mentor that I wouldn't have been here without him, so thank you. And thank you all for being here and choosing this session and choosing this talk to listen to me talk and brag about my research. As you all know, we love talking about our own research. I'll try not to go too long. I can go all day. But I am here today to talk to you about feeling loved, what makes us feel loved, not just in theory, but in actual reality, in your day-to-day lives. And I started from this very simple question, which took me across the globe. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. We actually started here in the US, and we went to a couple of countries trying to find out what makes people feel loved, and the project is still ongoing. Well, first and foremost, we all treat love as a universal, right? We think it's something that everyone feels in the same way. But is it really? What we believe in our research is that love speaks a universal language. However, it has a distinct accent in every culture. And we have to recognize that in order to understand love fully. So today you'll see that the moments that make people feel loved are surprisingly very culturally patterned. And they're not very random or just purely personal, neither are they all universal. So we have to kind of dig into that a little bit more. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about where we're going today on this journey. First, I'm going to tell you why love matters for flourishing specifically. I'm going to talk to you about a new way to study love that is culturally specific and we can actually navigate across cultures to understand it. Then I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we've learned so far from our investigations in the US, Spain, Brazil, and beyond. And I'll end with implications of love research for flourishing and where we're heading next. Well, first and foremost, love is essential to human flourishing. How do we know that? Social bonds are among the strongest predictors of mortality. They actually rival smoking. And there's data behind that. Love also is the #1 predictor of life satisfaction across nations. So this is love that comes with social bonds. And it's a pretty strong predictor of resilience, immune function, and mental health. So now that we know that close relationships and social bonds are such strong predictors of both physical and psychological well-being, as well as resilience, why is it that we don't know a lot about what makes us feel loved, especially in our everyday life moments and across cultures? So that's why I propose positive psychology needs a more culturally grounded science of love. So what have we been missing in the research so far? So what we're seeing is that most of the foundational love research has come from weird countries, those Western, industrialized, rich, democratic countries, right? And we're basically leaving the rest of humanity out of the research. We also see that in our classical love theories, we're very focused on those grand gestures, those romantic gestures. But that's not where most people get their doses of love from. And a lot of these social bonds and feelings of love are assumed as universal. So we think that everyone experiences them in the same way. However, in order to really understand this fully, we have to have measures of love that are embedded in culture. Therefore, we designed a new research program to address all of these gaps, and let me walk you through it. This is where it all began. So we needed a method that really kind of could get us inside a culture's understanding of love. We didn't want to impose our own understanding onto the culture's conception of love. We wanted them to tell us what love means for them, right? So we took this approach through the cultural consensus theory approach, which I will tell you a little bit more. We took it to the road, and we started off as our foundational study in the United States. That's where the journey began. we conducted a couple of studies in the US to understand love in different cultural groups, in the general population, but also across the lifespan, as well as immigrant groups. Once we kind of had that foundation, we tested out the method, we tried it out, we got really insightful information and results. We were like, okay, we can now take this across the globe and see how this looks like in other countries and cultures. So we went off on our global journey, and we started off with Spain. Spain was our southern European country. It was a very, family-oriented, emotionally and physically expressive culture. So we wanted to kind of understand and see whether feeling love in day-to-day life looked the same in that kind of a culture compared to our ground truth, which was the United States. Once we completed that, we went to Brazil. Brazil was our Latin American country. It's very religiously diverse. It has a collectivistic kind of a culture, very multicultural roots, and very warm and welcoming. That's also completed. Japan is our next stop. So we're headed to Japan in the next coming months. We're very excited about that. We're right now in the process of preparing for that. Japan is our East Asian country. There's a lot of differences in how care and support and love is expressed in a country like Japan compared to the other countries that we had. So we really wanted to kind of understand love through their lens. Our fourth country coming up is India, which is our South Asian country. Multi-religious, collectivistic and warm, but a rapidly changing society. We have Kenya planned as well as our African country, very communal and rooted in values of interdependence. And last but not least, we have Saudi Arabia planned in our travel as a Middle Eastern and Islamic-oriented country. Very hospitable, as well as very family honor oriented. So this is kind of the wide variety of countries that we've either gone to or plan to go to in order to kind of get a more comprehensive understanding of love across cultures. I totally understand this is just a handful of all the different cultures that are out there. However, resources, time limits us to the few that we have access to. So these are kind of the 6 that we've chosen to kind of, that we hope that will give us at least an initial impression of how love is felt in everyday life. All right, so what do we actually do in each of these countries? We approach this from a mixed method approach. Now that we're kind of embarking on this really big journey, this is a 5-year project that we've kind of been working on. We're now 2 years into it, 3 more years to go, but we've been doing great so far, so I'm optimistic. So we're approaching this from a mixed method approach, meaning that we have field work, qualitative work, as well as quantitative data collection. So first and foremost, we do ethnographic field work, where we actually go to the culture, go to the country, and really immerse ourselves into the culture and try to understand this phenomenon from the people's point of view. We also do a lot of focus groups and interviews while we are there in that country. So we sit down, we talk to people, we hear their stories, and we kind of let them tell us what love means to them, how they experience it in their day-to-day lives, and how they experience it across their different relational ties that they have. We then do some thematic analysis. So we kind of now dig deep into these interviews that we do, we transcribe them, and we look through all of these stories that they've told us and try to see if there's a pattern that occurs across all of our interviews that kind of represents how love is situated and embedded in the target culture. Based on what we find from these interviews and field work and what we come up with this questionnaire that is specific to that exact country. And we come up with different scenarios, different everyday life scenarios that show some way of feeling loved. So, for example, it could be as simple as when someone holds the door for me when I'm approaching the door, or when my pet greets me when I come home, right? Or when my husband brings coffee to me in the morning. So very small, everyday life, mundane, if we may say, experiences, but have long-lasting impressions on people and their feelings of love. So once we compile that questionnaire, that's when we go into our large-scale data collection, and and we basically try to understand from a bigger sample, a representative sample population of that population of the country, to see if all people in that country agree or don't agree on specific scenarios that we kind of extracted from those interviews. I'll give you examples in a second. All right, so how do these questionnaires look like? So these questionnaires are called the Felt Love questionnaires. So you might see them out there. They're becoming more. We started with the Felt Love questionnaire for the US. There's a couple of publications of ours on that you can find on the internet. And then we've been expanding this to Felt Love Questionnaire Spain, Felt Love Questionnaire Brazil, Japan, and so on. So every country will have their own Felt Love Questionnaire. Some of the items might be similar because there is a universal aspect to feeling love, but a lot of them are also very culturally specific. They typically span from 60 to 70 everyday experiences, and they are around certain themes that we're finding. So for example, in the US, we had themes like warmth and physical affection, like someone hugs them, right? Someone blows them a kiss, someone brings them flowers. We had support and care, like bringing soup when you're sick. Trust and acceptance, when you feel accepted in a group. Time and presence, when you spend quality time with your close others. We also had things like controlling behavior, things that we would dub as controlling behavior, maybe in the United States, but it might be caring in other cultures. So these are the types of behaviors that we actually want to test out and see if these are culturally specific or not, right? So for example, someone monitoring you all the time or wanting to know where you are at all times. And we had some neutral control items to make sure that, our questionnaire is actually testing what it's supposed to. We had things like the sun is shining, the clouds are in the sky, things like that, to make it a complete, kind of rounded up questionnaire. This is what the questionnaire would look like in a pen and paper format. We actually do it online, so it would look a little bit different. But basically what the participants would be asked is the prompt, most people feel loved when, so it's not about you specifically, it's about most people, because we want to get at the shared beliefs of a culture, right? So we want to see if there is a shared understanding among people within a culture around love. So we ask them, most people feel loved when, and then we give them these kind of everyday life experiences. So we have scenarios like someone shows compassion towards them in difficult times, or we have their pets are happy to see them, or they feel comfortable around people. So there's a wide variety of scenarios that you see here that kind of, we try to capture all of the scenarios that have the potential of making people feel loved. But we're relying on the people to tell us which ones they feel are true and which ones they feel are false. And then once we have all of the responses in our quantitative scales from a wide variety of people, that's when the fancy modeling stuff starts. So we use a Bayesian cognitive psychometric modeling. It's a mouthful, but basically it's a decision tree model. So once people have responded to true, false, or don't know, if they don't know yet an answer, then we start modeling a decision tree for each person, right? And through this, the model actually captures whether there is high levels of agreement on a certain experience or scenario that we present to them from the whole culture, from the people of that culture, or there's uncertainty that some people are saying true, some people are saying false, or everyone's saying false. That means they all feel it's non-loving, right? And we also get to understand their decision-making styles, whether they have tendencies in a way towards always guessing when they don't know the answer, or if they have a tendency to always pick true versus false. So we get to capture all of those decision-making biases that a person has that brings with themselves into responding to that questionnaire. And we get to really get a systematic response from the model, whether the culture agrees on certain scenarios that are loving or whether they don't agree. So it's kind of, and the modeling has, we've been working on it throughout, our research in the US, and we've tried to kind of really perfect it to make sure that we're getting at the crux of what we want to get. So our guiding theoretical perspective is cultural consensus theory, as I brought it up before. So basically CCT asks, does this group share a common understanding of what makes people feel loved? So this group can be a culture of a nation. This group can be a group of Facebook users or a group of young adults, right? So it's up to you who you define that group or culture to be. And then we want to understand whether there is a shared common understanding among the people in that group. So think of it as discovering the community answer key to a specific question. So when most people converge on the same responses, we say that there is a cultural model of love for that people in the culture. And we have research out there now that says if your own understandings of love matches the cultural model of love of the nation that you're living in or the group that you're within, that is actually related to higher levels of flourishing. So your understanding of love matching the cultural understanding matters. All right, so let's go see some results. So we started off with the US. We've done some foundational studies. We've gone through some lifespan studies and studies of immigrants. So first of all, what makes the general population in the US feel loved? Okay, so this is what we found. We found these everyday moments that matter most, which are checking in, making sure that the person feels seen and heard, being there when they're, in difficult times or they're sick. Very simple gestures of care and support. We've also found out that warmth and autonomy come hand in hand in the US, right? So you can actually be loving towards someone, but also respecting their independence. So that's very important in the US as well. We very well found that controlling behavior are not loving behavior, right? So if you, keep on texting your significant other to see where they are, that's culturally understood as non-loving, right? If your mom keeps on wanting to know where you are or keeps a tab on you or follows you on social media, those are definitely not loving behaviors in the US. They might be in other cultures though. Those are the things we want to find out. We then went into kind of trying to see if this shared belief on love is developmentally related. So do young adults form their own shared beliefs around love compared to older adults who may have their own types of beliefs? We found that there was a lot of similarity. So there are a lot of similarity between young adults, older adults, and the general population, which were around like, again, child snuggling up to you. That was loving to everyone. One of the highest agreed upon scenarios that we've had across everyone in the United States. Hearing someone say, I love you, is pretty much loving to everyone across the lifespan, across all people in the United States. What stood out in young adults is that for young adults, a lot of experiences of belonging was important, as well as identity. So, someone signaling that they believe in their future, or just being accepted in a group. These are very related to kind of those identity-related kind of growth matters that come with development and are important in the young adulthood stage. We also found that the one item that we had about positive feedback on the internet that didn't really come up as very highly agreed upon in the general population, in the young adults, it was agreed upon as loving. So getting positive feedback for young adults is loving, while it might not be for others. For the older adults, interestingly, for the controlling items, or the controlling behavior items, we found that older adults agreed that all of the 5 controlling behaviors that we had in there, they were all non-loving with confidence, high agreement, right? For young adults, they weren't all agreed upon as non-loving. So we're kind of seeing that there is a gradual boundary setting that happens across adulthood that might not show up necessarily at the beginning, but it kind of comes up as we develop later into adulthood. And also another thing we found with older adults was an item about solving a difficult problem. And that was the only item that was found as loving for older adults and not for the general population nor the young adults. And, we're thinking that it may be because of, older adults tend to remove those kind of higher cognitive burden problems from their lives, and having someone there to do that and help them through it is a very loving gesture to them. All right, so when we went into the immigrant populations in the United States still, there was a lot of shared experiences that were loving for both groups. Compassion in times of need, child snuggling up to you, spending quality time, being cared for. These were all agreed upon as loving. The differences were very nuanced. They were small. Maybe a couple of the scenarios were different across the two groups, but they were interesting. So wanting to spend all of your time with someone for immigrants was loving, whereas for the general US population was agreed upon as non-loving. So, we're seeing that a lot of the people who might be immigrating to the United States might be coming from these more kind of relational cultures, right? Where closeness and spending time together, regardless of whether it's imposed on you or not, matters, right? And it's important, and it's feeling, and it's loving. Whereas, in the general US population, that's not the fact. We also found singing the national anthem was an interesting one that was loving for the United States. I should say it wasn't as highly agreed upon, but it was agreed upon to an extent as loving, but not for the immigrants. And that kind of can speak to the fact that, with immigration, your sense of identity and belonging is a little bit complicated, right? You might feel loved by a certain culture or flag and not another one. Or you might actually be very ambivalent because you've been rejected from one culture, or, not feeling belonging in another culture. So it's very complicated. So that's where it's kind of showing up in our research. All right, now let's go across the globe. We finished our Spain, basically, publication. It's under review right now. So this is the first one that's coming out from our global study. And we have concrete results from this one. We did the field work there with 100 interviews that we were able to complete, so we were very proud of that. We were doing interviews until the night that we were actually flying back to the US. So we wanted to achieve that 100 number, and we did. And then once the qualitative transcripts were all analyzed, and we had a felt love questionnaire, we did a quantitative survey from 500 people, representative of the census of the population of Spain. Here are some fun pictures from us in the field. We had fun. We had also a lot of ups and downs. A lot of culture shock, if you want to believe it or not, which I didn't think. I thought, Europe, that's the easy one. Let's go get it done and come back. It's very similar to the US. But no, when you actually go there to get things done, you realize that cultures are very different. Things get done differently, and you have to go with the pace of the culture. So we learned a lot just throughout kind of carrying this out. We learned a lot from the people. We sat down with them for hours. We listened to them. We cried with them. We laughed with them. We really heard them to kind of understand what love means to them from their lens and how they go about their day-to-day lives. Now let's look at what we found in Spain. All right, as usual, support, shared presence, and quality time is always up there as one of those highest agreed upon loving scenarios. Family came up as a core place of support and love. People rely on their family as well as their friends to get those dosage of love in their day-to-day lives, right? So we're talking about everyday life. We're not talking about once a month, right? So this is really embedded to their day-to-day lives. Connecting with family, connecting with friends, that's a big part of their kind of support system and their care system and the way that they feel loved. We also found that physical expression played a big part in this community and culture. So those 2 kisses that come in whenever you greet someone, that means a lot to them, and it really kind of gets them going, and they really feel loved by those. And it's not really just connected to romantic partners, right? So these physical gestures are towards everyone. I was surprised that I would just greet a stranger that I had never met, and I would be hugged and kissed and all over the place. I was like, okay, we're in this culture now. So it's a transition, but it's beautiful. It's really beautiful. We found that for romantic love, safety was more important than intensity. Being respected while also being unconditionally accepted was a big factor in that community. And jealousy and constant monitoring was also non-loving to them. And another interesting finding was thoughtful attention and food that came up. So basically things like when someone remembers details of me in our conversation, that makes me feel loved, right? It means they listened, which is I think a common theme that you heard last night from the talk from Sonia Lubomyrsky. Food, people come around food and drinks, and that's where kind of they bond, and that's where they get their dosage of love. So food is always one big component of their everyday experiences of love. So next we went to Brazil. Same thing happened. We had 101 interviews because a husband and wife came in. We were like, we have to stop at 100. We have to stop at 100. And they were like, no, can I have my wife in there too? Please, please. So we ended up with 101, and we were happy with that as well. So 101 interviews and focus groups, and then we had 486 people quantitatively surveyed from the Felt Love Questionnaire based in Brazil. I'm going to go through this quickly because I don't want to leave time for Q&A. Another fun picture of our fieldwork in Brazil. Very loving, very warm, very welcoming, and then we really felt it. They're very generous, and we had this big group of students you see in that picture. They were all Brazilian, and they voluntarily came in to help us to the best that they could. And I should tell you, all of our interviews were in the target country's language, so we relied on them to carry out the interviews for us. All right, and what did we find in Brazil? Very, very, very exciting finding. This is not published yet. We are still in the works, so these are preliminary findings I'm showing you hot out of the oven. We're just writing them up. But faith and spiritual care, being connected to God, was the highest agreed upon item we had in that country. We also found family and parental bonds, and that bond went beyond just family, just parents, and to grandparents and extended family as well. Spiritual and emotional depth. The concept of praying for each other came up a lot in our interviews, and this concept of being blessed by your parents as you're getting out of the house, so they bless you as they say goodbye to you, was a loving gesture in their day-to-day lives. Food, of course it comes up again. Food is loving again in this culture as well. And food comes with other people caring and making that favorite food for you, right? Just making that gesture, and it happens a lot here. Interestingly, in Brazil, from just my own perception, it was a lot of preparing food for each other. In Spain, it was a lot of coming together around food, even if it was in a restaurant, right? Even if it was just getting beer. So that was a very nuanced difference that I picked up. A term that I'm going to butcher, probably if anyone knows Portuguese, saudade, is a term that we found out about. It's actually the feeling of longing for someone. So when you miss someone, for them it's a loving feeling. It's a loving experience. So it might actually feel a bit sad, right? When you miss someone, you maybe cry, you listen to sad music, all of that. But longing for someone and missing them was a loving gesture for people in Brazil that was very unique to this culture. Another very specific, unique cultural component was cafune. Just stroking someone's hair. That is so unique to the Brazilian culture. And when we were talking to our students, they were like, who doesn't love cafune? Like, who wouldn't be loved by cafune? So it's a very intimate and loving gesture for them that we rarely experience in other cultures. All right, Japan is upcoming soon. Hopefully next year, this time, at the next WPPA, I have more to say on that. So we're doing all of the spiel that we've done in other countries and try to understand how love feels in the Japanese culture. We do kind of now know that there are universalities across the loving experiences. Physical closeness, care during hardship, quality time with each other. They basically come up in every culture. But then there are specificities, right? So for US, it's autonomy alongside warmth. For Spain, it's family and friends as those primary sources of love, while there's, physical affection is a big part of their day-to-day life gestures of love. And for Brazil, there's a lot of spiritual care as kind of a main focus of how people get their sources of love and feel loved. And family and food is a big source of love for them. Okay, so why does it matter that we do all of this work? For research, we know that we cannot any longer rely on weird samples, and we need to have more culturally valid measures of love so we can understand love more globally and have a true science of flourishing. For positive psychology, we now know that everyday love brings it's a pathway to flourishing, and there's data behind that. And so embedding that into our studies in positive psychology is a big gap that we need to address. For clinical practice, if you're working with a client, knowing their cultural model of love and how they receive care and support is important when you want to help a person. And for global health policy, now we know that these everyday gestures of love are pretty much measurable ways that lead to better health overall. So having interventions that include and amplify these types of experiences in people's lives is important and beneficial. And I'm going to end this with this quote: "To understand love fully, we must listen to the many ways the world loves, and this listening is what has taken us from California to Madrid to Rio and hopefully to Tokyo and beyond." Thank you so much. And if you're interested, this is my lab website. We have everything about the project on there. We have a monthly blog that we actually describe what we're doing this month across this journey that we're going. We're giving you all the details and the dirt behind what I just described. You can sign in and get those blogs as well, and you can contact us as well if you have any questions. Sorry, I went long.
Okay, we have some time for questions.
Yes?
I've done a lot of cultural study myself, done a lot of reading. Are you familiar with Hofstede and Nikoff's work?
Yes.
Cultures and Organizations? Okay, so with regard to the three countries that you just mentioned, in Spain, I would be very concerned with your sampling of Castilians versus Catalonians, right? And then Basques in the north.
Yeah.
I mean, there are three pretty distinct cultural differences.
Which is why our quantitative sample actually embraces all of Spain. So we only went qualitatively and talked to people in Madrid. However, our quantitative sample, that is a bigger sample, that was done through Qualtrics, which does kind of targeted sampling. We made sure that we had people from all the regions across Spain, all different age groups, genders, SES backgrounds. So we tried to make sure that we represent the country in a way.
And you feel you were able to generalize among all of those and come up with statistically valid conclusions?
Well, I'm being transparent on what I'm presenting. Yeah. So it's research is always limited. So unless I go in and really kind of talk to every person in that country, I will not be able to say that this represents every single person in that country. But this is kind of the way that we try to make sure that it's as generalizable as possible by making sure that our sample is representative by the census of that country.
Okay, and then a similar comment about Brazil, Rio versus Brasilia.
Yeah.
And then what about the favelas up in the hills?
Yeah, so all of them. So even the favelas, we had, actually in our qualitative, we had those. So we had people from all different neighborhoods. And what we try to do is that we try to have different locations for our interviews to make sure that we don't just attract a specific neighborhood. We have multiple locations in different sides of the city, you know, low SES, high SES, all of that. We have multiple people doing the interviews. We make sure that age group is represented. We make sure that all different gender identities are represented. We actually have a good representation of all of the people we had actually could get our hands on in that city, right? With terms of the region of the country, that's where we tried to tackle in our more quantitative version, where we had access to these online surveys that we could kind of spread out throughout the region. Yes?
So I'm really interested in the lifespan perspective, and oftentimes the middle adults, sometimes we don't analyze the data, but I was wondering, were you able to see any patterns with middle adults between 30 and 65? If not, are there any plans to look?
We have not tackled that one yet. So yes, and I would love to do that. So my all of the two studies that you saw from young adulthood and older adulthood were student ran. So our students basically ran based on their interest, the specific adult group that they wanted to kind of address, and they went with it. So I am looking for another student to come in and take our middle-aged group. Yes, great question. I love that you picked up on that. I knew someone would pick up on that. Yes.
First of all, I want to say thank you for doing all the legwork around the globe. This is what I'm understanding what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, that all of the people of the world see love as a virtue, like we see patience, like we see generosity, like we see humanity. However, we don't apply the global identity that we have to the expression of love. We are still stuck in our tribal identities when it comes to who deserves our love. So basically we become, this expression of love becomes a cause of further fever in the human global seeing, that we are supposed to be seeing each other as cells of the same body. So the body is having fever and crises because this tribal-mindedness causes separation and withdrawing of the love because someone doesn't look like us, someone does not have the same religion as us, someone does not have the same hair as us, or does not come from the same country or whatever. So am I understanding this right, that we are at a crisis situation because of the way we limit the circle of love? It's supposed to be global, but now it is not.
I don't know if we can say it's supposed to be global or it's supposed to be felt in a specific way, and if someone is feeling it in a different way, that's wrong, or it's, you know, a tension that is happening. I can't speak to that honestly because I'm not studying it that way, right? But I do feel like with any type of experience that's very culturally based. So certain psychological experiences are very culturally informed. So even with immigrants that you saw, so a lot of those immigrants had these kind of original cultures that they came from, right? But a lot of their beliefs had now kind of aligned with the belief that they were living in, right? So we tend to kind of align our thinking and our behavior towards the culture or towards the group that we live in to make sure we survive, because the concept of in-group, out-group, right? And we are finding that the more your thinking of love is aligned with the culture's shared beliefs of love, the higher your well-being and flourishing is. So kind of matching the culture that you're in is kind of part of the way how we navigate life in general.
Would you suggest that in order to get out of the prison of cultures in the global world, that we should include or think about teaching the oneness of humanity to all our students around the globe?
Yes, well, again, I don't think that we should all be speaking the same language, but I think we should be learning about our languages, right? So, and that's kind of one of the biggest aims of this research is while we're actually going there and exploring these things, we're trying to see what is universal, what is culturally specific, and how can we make sure that those culturally specific nuances are understood by other people so that when we communicate globally, we are able to communicate that love. If your language of love is different from mine, and the way I use love languages is different from that whole book and term, if your language is different from mine, then we're not going to be able to express love to each other, or the way I express it will not feel loving to you, right? So understanding those nuances is going to bring us closer. Yes?
So thank you so much for all this work. I'm excited to use your work in my psychology and culture class as an example of multi-methods and mixed methods, and like why it's important to understand culture. I'm curious about you started in the U.S. and then in Spain and in Brazil you found for one of the things you found was the importance of food. And I'm curious if you have any kinds of thoughts of circling back and saying, okay, maybe in the U.S. food did not emerge as a first mention in the qualitative themes, but when you ask about food and find out, again, like, does it get?
I love that question.
Too.
I love that question. We always go back. So we do actually aim at the end of all of this to do another cross-cultural survey across all of these countries, including the U.S., with this now more comprehensive list of expressions that we've kind of now derived from people, and go at it again and test it out and see if we find any similarities or differences there too.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
Do we have
I think
time
we
for
have one more.
Okay. Now, this is so hard.
You've been.
I saw you. I know you've been holding your hand up. Go ahead.
Just a very quick question. So I appreciate the limitations of any research, and you showed again the map and thinking, well, you want to just try and pick some countries, try to represent sort of across continents.
Yeah.
Could you speak just briefly about what went into your thought process in the ones that you did pick? Also thinking about sort of historical context of languages in colonial era, going from Southern Europe, for instance, and then you're in South America. How did you actually decide to land on the countries that you did? If you already elaborated on it, I might have missed it, but just a little bit additional details.
Yeah, so there's a lot that goes on. I mean, you said it. We wanted to go at least one country per continent. We didn't go for Australia because it was another Western country. Wanted to kind of limit those a little bit. I went with understanding religion and religion orientations, because that's another factor that is important to me, and I want to understand how that plays a factor into people's understanding of love. So I wanted to make sure that there was a variety of religions represented there. Cultural backgrounds, diversity in cultures, and how many cultures I can get represented in that country, and the dominance of that culture within that region in a way, but also at the end of the day, our access and our regional collaborators that were there that I would be able to kind of connect with and make this work doable. Even with all of that planning, with every country, we have these hurdles, right? Making sure that the person who promised us to do this, 3 years ago, are they still available? Do they have the resources? All of that. So a lot of nuances goes into it, although, I would have loved for it to be perfect. It can never be perfect unless we actually go to every country. Even within countries, there's so much diversity. Like, we go to this city and everyone's like, but you haven't been to the south, but you haven't been to the north, but and so, it just feels like I'm missing out on so much, but there's so much that we can do.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me just add one thing before we end, is the Templeton Foundation really wanted to try to understand love around the world. And of all of the scientists, competing for money, they put it all into Saida's research, $1.7 million. And this is it's going to be a landmark study in really understanding at great detail. And I mean, the methodology here is so sophisticated. You did a great job sharing it with us, and we're going to learn more and more as this unfolds. So let's give her a big round of applause.